Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and listen, we're going to have a statewide debate about property taxes again because there's a ballot measure being circulated that would, if passed, ultimately on the ballot, would eliminate property taxes. And I mean, listen, it feels like if you follow North Dakota politics, and why on earth would you be listening to this podcast if you don't? You know that property taxes are like the low-grade fever of the American electorate. Like everybody's always upset about it. It may not always be the number one issue that people are upset about in any given moment, but I would wager to bet that on any given day, you ask people to name their top 5 local North Dakota issues, property taxes would be one of them in the top 5, if not number 1. So what do we do about it? You know, the legislature's been trying to do things, clearly giving the durable consternation about this. It's not satisfying anybody. And so we look at the local level, and the problem is that at the local level, this is so fractured. I mean, you talk about property taxes as a statewide problem, but, you know, really, that may not necessarily be the case where you live. Your spending priorities in your city or your county may be a very different thing. Also, even where you live, there are multiple governing entities that are making decisions that impact your property tax bill. When you get your property tax bill, and I just got mine, that said increase down the list. So thanks. It's the county, it's the park board, it's the school board, it's the municipal government. It's really complex, and I think as a political issue, it becomes really complex. Now, I've been talking a lot about this and writing about a lot about this as I kind of look at property tax increases happening around the state. I was just talking with somebody in Williston who said, "Yeah, we're going to get hit," and it kind of seems like at times like local governments are kind of helping out the campaign to abolish property taxes because people are upset about them. We're going to get a bunch of increases this year, and what does that mean for what the vote's going to be? I hope people don't vote for this measure. I don't support it. I don't think it's a good idea. But what does all that mean? Anyway, in that context, I wanted to bring on our guest, who is Grand Forks Mayor Brandon Bochenski, who wants to make the case for what he says is sound administration of local spending and local taxes that's happening in his city. And, of course, my co-host Chad Oban here as well. Mayor Bochenski, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You want me to get right into it, or you got questions to start?
Why don't you just get right in it? We made Brandon endure some baseball talk before we even got started here. So having put him through that, we're just gonna cut the reins loose, Mayor. Hop to it.
Well, I think you made a very good point right in the middle there too. Is locally you may have an issue where one entity has done a pretty sound job, and others may have struggled a little bit, and then it kind of all falls on you anyways. For example, in the city of Grand Forks, we've had our 4th straight mill cut, but that's on the heels of the county raising, roughly 10 mills over 2 years, and the school board raising 31 mills over 2 years. So regardless if you're, 1 and 2 mill cuts, it really doesn't, change the dynamic. But at least as a city, I think we've been very efficient. We've managed to give our employees raises. We raised it for a little over 14% over 2 years. We've managed to cut property tax without using reserves. We've managed to have a big surplus, about $6 million, $4 million in 2022, $2 million in 2021. So we're adding to our reserves, cutting mills, and running a really efficient government.
So, Brandon, I think you bring up a really good point in terms of Grand Forks, that the city's lowered mills and then the other entities potentially have raised them. The same thing is happening in West Fargo. The schools in West Fargo just cut their mills, but others are raising them. So can you tell me a little bit about how you interact with those other political subdivisions? Because I'm a property taxpayer. At the end of the day, I write a check. I look at the amount that I'm paying. How it gets broken down, less of a priority for me. It's just the money coming out of my pocket. Do you coordinate with the county elected leaders, the school boards, the township, the parks about how you're going to handle property taxes?
I think our best coordination, at least for the city, comes with the park district. We're pretty much in step. So if we're cutting, usually they're cutting as well. The schools are a little bit of their own animal, and so is the county. We do the best we can. We want to support them when they're trying to get things done. But sometimes it's certainly tough, when we're trying to be more efficient and kind of shrink government, and you see them growing, you're maybe not on the same page all the time. And some of them are legacy issues. I came into a financial situation that allowed me to do something where the counties and the schools have had issues for decades. So we do coordinate. We do try to support them. What we can do, I think, as a city is try to grow that tax base, find other revenue sources. That helps everybody. But it is challenging. It's really hard to say, okay, you got a school coming. The county wants to do a jail project. Maybe we don't do those in the same year. Well, those are two projects that aren't even city projects. So we try to coordinate, but it's really hard because everybody has needs.
Now, Brandon, well, first of all, I should have asked you from the get-go, do you support, I guess because I don't know, do you support this ballot measure to abolish property taxes?
I don't think there's enough information. I think it's the questions really come down to a consumption basis. You're going to have higher sales tax, probably higher income tax. If you're a person that consumes a lot of housing, but you don't buy a lot of products and goods and you don't work, you might come out ahead. But businesses, it's going to come down to businesses as well. What are businesses going to do with their increased profits? Are they giving those back to employees, or are they going to put that in their pocket? One way, it could certainly grow. There's just so many aspects to it that I think need to be studied and looked at before you would go that route. I know the two big winners. Anybody that owns a lot of property is definitely a winner. I think Fargo is a big winner. They have the most property value. They're going to get the biggest check from Bismarck, and they've got the most legislators. So I think people that own a lot of property are winners. I think Fargo is a big winner. The rest, I think it remains to be seen. And if you jump on this, you go this route, there's no turning back. I can't see a ballot measure in the future saying, let's bring back property tax. That'll never happen.
So Brandon, let's talk a little bit about sort of where you just got there. So you said in Grand Forks, there might be a jail that's needed. There might be a school that's needed. Now let's talk about 53 counties, 180 school districts, all going to Bismarck and standing in line and asking for your school and asking for your jail. Like, how in the heck could that possibly work? And if I'm a community member in Grand Forks, do I really want Bismarck legislators determining if I get a jail or not?
Well, and top that off, we've just added term limits. So now you got freshman and sophomore legislators that are making that decision. And I do think, regardless of what you say, there's still fiscal control that's clearly going to come out of there. I mean, if my kid breaks his hockey stick and needs to buy a new hockey stick, he might be able to pick out which one he wants, but he ain't going to be able to pay for it if I don't give him the money. So I think, when you talk about that, it's going to be it's going to be chaotic for quite a while as it gets sorted out, and the needs of all those counties, all those cities on the back of, and we've got great legislators, but they're all going to be new and fresh now going into the future. So it's for a state that's very freedom loving, we suddenly are putting measures on there, that are giving more power to a centralized state government, which seems to be counterintuitive, at least.
Well, also a part-time state legislature too. You even talk about, well, we're going to have term limited lawmakers. They already have a lot to do just with what's already on their plate of governing the state. And now on top of it, we're going to add the needs of 53 counties and school districts and park districts and everything else across the state. And they're part-time. So, I don't know. Have you thought at all about the timeline of this, Brandon? Because if this passes in November, if it makes we should be clear, it's being circulated for signatures right now. I think it's going to make the ballot. I mean, our initiated measure process is so ridiculous. You could basically pay your way onto the ballot. And it doesn't seem like fraud seems to matter at all. anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole. I think this thing's going to be on the ballot. And so if it passes in November, it takes effect in January, which is when the legislature. So have you thought at all about like how Grand Forks prepares itself for not having a property tax come January 2025?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Timing. Certainly we're more efficient, which may actually hinder us. I mean, our question is, okay, if they're just going to go based off your current tax, should we try to raise our tax real quick? So we're going to have a higher chunk of change and a little bit more cushion. We've looked at other revenue sources. We've looked at how do we use sales tax. We've also looked at franchise fees. We've kept our franchise fees low and tried to draw in, blockchain mining, other types that bring in more revenue to our bottom line. We tried to bring in, University of North Dakota properties onto the tax roll through public-private partnerships. So we've tried to find other ways to bring in revenue. So we've kind of already done some of that. We've got a tremendous staff. We've got a staff that's really been here the whole time, that is seasoned. So I'm not as worried about our city. We'll find a way to plow through it, because you're right. If it happens that quick, you got a budget that you pass in September, essentially. There's a ballot measure in November, then January, they're going to make this. You crumple up your budget, throw it away, and start over again. It'll be interesting. There's a lot of pieces to it that are going to have to be sorted out in a big hurry.
So I'm going to shift gears just slightly off of property taxes and talk about government working. Follow me here. In the late 90s, I lived south of the University of North Dakota, and I would drive up 42nd every day. I'd cross Demers, and then I would wait for trains to go by and be late for my classes at Gamble Hall. The city of Grand Forks and the state and the federal government have made it so kids can get to Gamble Hall on time. Can you talk a little bit about that infrastructure project? And like, I'm not kidding when I say, when I read about that, it's the most excited I've ever been about a government project, because I remember, 20 years ago sitting at that intersection. So basically the corner of 42nd and Demers, you're going to make it so trains and cars can work together, correct?
Yeah, we got an underpass. It's a project that's been talked about for 20 years. We kept beating the drum, working with DOT. Well, first I'll talk about Gamble Hall, since you spent some time there. I also happen to get an economics degree from our state flagship university. I'll throw that out there. So I definitely had times where I was dealing with that route too. But yeah, we put a great grant out there, worked with DOT. We're getting roughly $37 million in federal funds to get a $50 to $60 million project done. That's taken 2 decades. And that's just, you got to give credit to our staff and for our political leaders for just willing to continue to push that. It's kind of, I make the analogy of Shawshank Redemption, and he writes a letter every week, and they finally give him the money. Then what are you going to do? Now you're going to write 2 letters a week. So we were able to do that and finally get the feds to realize this was important and give us the money for it. So I'm pretty excited. The shovel should hit the ground, hopefully in about 2 years' time.
I just want to point out that Chad being late for class was probably Chad's fault. Something that happens every day, Chad, is probably something that you could adapt to.
No, always Burlington Northern's fault.
Always Burlington? Okay.
Northern. It's easy to blame the railroads. Yeah, they're a nameless, faceless entity.
So why is, I guess, shifting back to the property tax, and I mean, you make a good case. Like we're doing it well in Grand Forks. I think you could argue, and I don't, because it's so hard to talk about, because I don't know what's going on in Wimbledon, North Dakota, right? I don't live there. I don't really follow the local governments unless somebody like calls me or something. I don't really know. So if somebody from Wimbledon says that they're upset about their property tax, I don't, maybe people are making bad decisions, or maybe Wimbledon had some projects they needed to get done. I don't know. I think that's one of the confounding things of talking about this, but why are property taxes just this eternal? When I talk to people from other states, they don't talk about property taxes, it seems to me, the way we talk about it in North Dakota. So why are people so upset about this all the time?
Well, it's your access. You got so much better access locally. I think if anybody makes an argument of where the most waste is, I think if you're starting to go larger and further away, as you get to the federal government, I would clearly think that's the most waste. But you just don't have the access like you have locally. So I think that's where it comes from, and it's just a simple dollar amount. I mean, you can get, sort of tax on a percentage for what you buy. You don't see that, it doesn't add up, but you look at your tax statement, suddenly you see this year I got 17% increase. it's really kind of a visceral reaction that you get, like, gosh, like, and you have access to those local leaders. If you look at this at more of a macro level, too, how sustainability is going to be an issue. I think they may pencil out like $1.2 billion a year to get this done. Our state has a lot of infrastructure needs that it has to get done on top of this. I just don't know long term, how you can get this going with those small cities, like you said, that might have a project one year. We're all turned into grant writers then for the state government, is pretty much what every city and county turns into. And you're out there hand in hat trying to say your project's better than the next.
Yeah, and I have a lot of faith in North Dakota voters understanding that you can't fund our priorities, be it public safety or schools or whatever, on sort of hopes and prayers. I mean, in sort of, mix it all together and then hope that we can build our roads or our sewer system or make sure we have the police officers we need moving forward. But you sort of alluded to sort of the centralized government sort of aspect of this. So the people who are pushing this fancy themselves as conservatives. I think both you and Rob probably consider yourselves conservative. Is this a conservative strategy to centralize all these decisions with North Dakota legislators? We don't like when the feds are telling us what to do. Why in the world would we want the state telling our locals what to do?
Well, it wouldn't make sense for it to be, and some of it may be a strategy to just gain more power at the state level through elected office. I mean, there's some sense of that in this mix, I think. So, would I love to? I mean, as a guy that's a developer, and own a lot of property here in the city of Grand Forks, I could trim, this would be great for me personally. Sure, I can trim a $60,000, $70,000 tax bill. If I'm a guy that's got a really fancy house and owns a bunch of properties in downtown Bismarck, I might save, $100,000 a year. I think it's great, but the average person is going to see that cost transferred over to their sales tax or income tax, and it'll be incremental, but they're probably going to end up paying more than they currently are. They might feel better, but they, at the end of the day, they might end up with less money. But I think there's so many other variables when it comes to businesses and how they use the extra funds that they would have. But, you earn an apartment. Rents too, I don't like, I know I'm changing the subject here, I don't like the idea of saying that rents are going to go down from this, because you're not going to change your current leases. Those are going to extend. And then now you have a property that's more valuable because it's more profitable, because you don't have as big of expenses. Your caps rates will adjust to that. So your valuations will only go higher. And then you're going to have to charge the rental rates to make up for your cost of your investment anyway. So a very quick shift on the, if you want to go back to economics on the Keynesian cross, you're going to have a quick shift. Investors will do great for a couple of years. We'll be right back where we were at the same rent prices. I can't see how that works.
What is our capacity for shifting because some of it is, we don't have a property tax. So, Bismarck's going to have to fill in a lot of the gap. But the other thing is there are other avenues for locals to raise revenues, the sales tax being an obvious one. But what's our capacity to do that? Because for one, I just started on an unrelated matter. I was interested. The city of Fargo is going to be voting on a sales tax thing for a convention center for the Fargo Dome, and that got me interested because it seemed to me like sales taxes never go down. Like, even when they're supposed to sunset, they never sunset. And so I actually went back and was getting data from. I can tell you, I've gone back 5 years. I've tracked 150 some changes across the state to sales tax. Not one of them is the sales tax being allowed to sunset. And I'm going to go back 20 years. I still got to get all the data, but I don't think it happens. And so part of me thinks, we've already been raising the sales tax. I'm wondering obviously this is going to vary from place to place, but what's our capacity for raising something like the sales tax to fill it in, especially for you? You're a border community, which means you're competing with Minnesota right across the river. Fargo probably even more so. Moorhead's a larger, probably retail center. So what? I guess that's my question. What's our capacity to raise sales taxes?
Well, obviously you need a local ballot measure, through your home rule charter. And to your first point about them sunsetting, the city of Grand Forks right now is looking. We had a sales tax for the Alaris Center to pay off those bonds for a really long time. That's going to sunset in 2029. The Alaris Center has been doing good. We're looking at how to fund some facilities, some sports, athletics, different facilities for kids, how to try to grow the population here. That's the sales tax we're looking at. We're looking at extending it and not letting it sunset.
And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. My warning to voters is you vote on it on the idea that it's going to sunset. Don't count on it, because that doesn't happen.
Well, you're looking at something that's already existing. You become comfortable paying that now, and it's better than adding mills to your taxes. So that's why we looked at that as a way to help fund some things to grow your town, so you don't have to raise taxes. But yeah, what's your capacity? Because Minnesota already is a little bit more favorable with like clothing necessities. So luckily, we have that shopping, more on the Grand Forks side. But that could definitely change if you start getting up, 8, 9, 10, and then I'm not just talking Minnesota border. You're also talking Canadian border where they don't have those VATs. We don't have the value added tax type of things that they're going to have up there. So when that dollar gets closer to parity, they're doing a lot of their shopping down here in Grand Forks and Fargo. So if that goes up to your 8, 9% from the 7, 7.25 that we're at now, you could see businesses lose some of those taxable sales.
Although I think the Canadians can get a refund on some of it, can't they? I think they could fill out a form, or they could.
Yeah. I mean, you're right on that front, but
it's been a long time since I worked in retail, but I remember we used to keep those forms for Canadian shoppers right out on the.
And there's always some slippage in there, but regardless, maybe it's not even the taxing side, but you might just lose the sales. It just might not be worth it.
I just happen to remember that from being an employee of that fine Grand Forks retailer, Home of Economy. I manage the MINOT.
Speaking of all the wonderful businesses based in Grand Forks, Brandon, you have mentioned several times sort of the idea of growing the community, bringing in young families and investing in the community. Grand Forks has changed. I mean, I said I was there in the late 90s. That was pre-Alaris. That was pre-Ingolstadt. I mean, the community's come a long way. Can you brag a little bit about what's going on in Grand Forks and why people should move to Grand Forks? I mean, we hear so much about Fargo. We hear so much mostly about Fargo. What's so great about Grand Forks? What's going on that's a good thing in Grand Forks?
Well, thanks for that. And I think if you just do a basic windshield tour, we've just put the pedal down. During COVID, we didn't get into a shell. We figured out how are we going to grow? How's the future going to come out of this? So we pushed a lot of development projects through when other people were quite honestly afraid to do things. So we've got a Beacon. I know Epic's been a hot topic, but we've got a really good contract with them. We've got Beacon by Epic's going to be a huge public square. Obviously, Alaris Center is getting the biggest, events. We got a children's museum that's going to come. We've got a very safe town that has a good value proposition. Our university campus looks phenomenal now. We've got different areas that we're seeing development, the parks, the green space. I think it's a phenomenal value proposition, and now we've got a lot for kids to do inside. A new CTE center, Career Technical Education Center, that's going to help educate our youth and our high school kids looking at these sports facilities. It's just I've got a lot of different places. I love North Dakota in general, but I was always called to come back here, and this is across the country and other countries. There's no better place to raise a family. So there's my pitch. I should just record that one and put it on my next election run. There
you go. I can. Well, the recording will be public, so I guess if you want to, feel free to use it if you want. I feel the same way about MINOT. Like, not running down anybody else. I love MINOT. It's home. I think people who care about their communities just get attached like that. Have you ever thought? And what brought this up is when you were calling UND the flagship, and I was imagining the NDSU people being like, "Hey, wait a minute," and I was thinking, "Boy, Brandon, you kind of put a dent in your maybe future ambitions for statewide office," which I want to ask you about. I feel like you're a conservative guy. You're a Republican. There's going to be a reshuffling, I think, where. Is Governor Burgum going to run for a third term, or is he going to stay out on the national campaign trail? I think there's a question mark there. We don't know. If somebody like a Kelly Armstrong were to run for governor, we'd have when that starts happening, things start shuffling around, and sometimes there's some openings. Have you ever thought about running for statewide office? Is that you're a young guy politically. I mean, have you thought about that?
Yeah, being 3 years in, I think I need to cut my teeth a little bit more. We've gone through some really challenging things, and I think at least what we've shown locally is that we're going to do the work. I've put the time in, and trying to think about something like that, amidst what we're trying to do locally, I just think would be a kind of a fool's errand at this point. So, I'll always keep my options open and find the best way that I can help. But at the end of the day, you got to focus on yourself and your family and make sure that the job that you're in is going well. So. That's probably the most political answer I've ever given to any question, but you know what? It was a question about politics, so that's why you get that answer.
So, Brandon, your term is up in 2024, though. Are you planning on seeking re-election to be mayor again?
There you go. We'll give you one breaking news, Rob. Yes, I do plan to run again. And, when I first came into office, I said I'd do 1 or 2 terms. I've got some young kids, but we've found a good balance over these 3 years, sometimes you have tough days, you take things home, but I got a rock star wife that really works hard to keep everything together behind the scenes. So I'm going to give it another go if I'm lucky enough to get reelected.
One last question on the property tax front. Let's say it kind of sounds from this interview. I know you started out saying that, we need more information and we need more study on it. I felt like that was you acknowledging there's a problem. I mean, there's obviously a disconnect, and part of why I don't want to abolish property taxes, I kind of feel like voters should feel like if we're going to grow government, like if we're going to spend something new, you should feel it. And I worry that if we keep pushing the spending up to higher levels of government, we push it up to the state, we push it up to the federal government, we don't feel it anymore. And I feel like we should have skin in the game. Government should be a cost-benefit analysis. We want to do something that has a benefit. Well, we also need to be cognizant of the cost. But anyway, if this measure doesn't pass, what do we do as a state to find some peace on this issue?
Wait and bring it up again in 10 years. No, we've got, I think we've got to continue to push our elected. I don't take it as a bad thing when someone pushes for you to be more efficient. I think that's fine to keep, expecting a lot out of your elected leaders. But at the same time, you got to give your elected leaders some grace, because if you keep treating people like garbage, you're not going to get your best people running for these offices. And if you look at kind of the fracture in the Republican Party, even being a person like myself, that I wouldn't consider myself far right. I consider myself, definitely on the right, but not far right. And, you end up getting attacked by both sides, and you're kind of wondering, I'm just trying to be reasonable here. So I think that'll be a challenge regardless. And just back to the whole property tax thing, I probably put forward, quite a few negatives. And, one thing that I'm still need more time to think on is just the way this affects businesses. And if businesses can see a lot more value in moving to Grand Forks, and you have some benevolent business owners, there could be some opportunity there, being the only state that doesn't have property tax. But then I wonder if you get a lot of business and you still have a high cost on other consumption type of taxes, can we draw the workforce in? So there's a little bit. I mean, I'm not ready just to try to kill it completely until I have a little bit more time to consider how that impact would be on businesses, factories, those type of large projects. So I added my own little thing to the end, but hopefully that helps.
Well, Brandon, I appreciate you coming on, and thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Take care, gents.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, just finished up our interview with Mayor Bochenski, and started with Chad Oban talking some smack about me during the break. I want to bring this out into the open before we get to the Senator Cramer is going to be subjected to this for a moment. Chad saying that when he's going to be on, it's going to be a better interview, it's going to be a smarter interview, all this stuff. You're just going to stand by that.
Yeah, I am. And actually, I just talked to a former Republican legislator. I had coffee with her a couple days ago, and she said, quote, "I believe in the Oban bump," unquote, when she talked about the Portcast. So I think there's a prairie fire going around the state, Rob, and I'm really bumping up your ratings.
So there's a lot of people that believe a lot of things that aren't true. So I guess we'll just
Rob, a lot of people are saying.
Like, folks, there's rumors in Milwaukee. All right. Well, Senator Kevin Cramer subjected to our banter here at the beginning. Senator, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Rob. I'm in Bismarck today. Preparing for a Labor Day weekend with grandchildren, and then going back to Washington, where things are likely to be much less pleasant than they are here as we head into the end of the fiscal year, a farm bill deadline, a Defense Authorization Act deadline, a leader who's struggling, and and then there's politics.
Let's. I want to ask about that. Mitch McConnell, and this has been a tough issue, really, across the board. There's a lot of concern about President Joe Biden's age. I think rightfully so. Frankly, there's a lot of concern about Donald Trump's age. Rightfully so. We had a situation with Senator Dianne Feinstein where she clearly at times has not looked at all up to the very rigorous job of being a United States Senator. And now your leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, has had a couple of instances where he's paused. It looks like he's kind of lost train of thought, or had a little bit of an alarming moment. It looked very fragile. Does that concern you at all? I mean, I guess as a member of this caucus, and I know you probably don't want to run down your leader, not that this would be running him down, but do these things concern you? What do we do about these things?
Well, first of all, with regard to Mitch and his personal health, it's always concerning to me when a colleague, whether it's John Fetterman, Dianne Feinstein, Pat Leahy, Mitch McConnell, it's always concerning when people, seem to be suffering a little bit. With regard specifically to Mitch, there are a couple of factors that the others I've named and that you've named don't have, and that is that Mitch is the leader of one of the two caucuses, and he's the longest term leader in the history of the United States Senate, as a matter of fact, either minority or majority in a contiguous term. So there's all of that. So I believe, and I've said pretty openly, and it's been, I'm sure you've seen it published a lot, both recently and back in June when he had the initial incident, or July, whenever it was, that, that there's a greater bar of transparency that's required of somebody whose constituency is not just his state, but rather, his caucus. And so there's that. And I expect when we get back next Tuesday, and we have lunch together, Wednesday, we always have lunch, the caucuses have lunch together every day, that we'll hear from Mitch. And that's the first thing, that's the most important thing. Mitch's situation, of course, was brought on after he fell, as you recall, at an event and hit his head and suffered a concussion and some cracked ribs. You could speculate about a lot of things. I don't like to speculate much, but obviously you can't ignore the fact that he had a concussion. He did come back to work after, I think it was 6 weeks. Maybe a couple more weeks would have been in order. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. I don't know. It's interesting, though, between these episodes, Rob and Chad, Mitch is Mitch. I mean, he's the same. In fact, as you noticed, after both of the episodes have been pretty profound, he's gone right back to the rest of his schedule and been Mitch again. So I don't know exactly what's going on and what's causing this sort of loss of train of thought or just this pause, or for that matter, whether it's something that would correct itself within a minute or two if he just stood there. I don't know. Is it concerning? Sure, it's concerning. I'm concerned for his health. I'm concerned for Dianne's. By the way, Dianne Feinstein, really one of the icons of the Senate. With regard to the age piece, Moses was 80 when he started doing the things he did, and John Fetterman's, I think, in his 40s, and he suffers as much as anybody in the Senate does. Chuck Grassley's in his 80s, and he still jogs every morning and does push-ups. So certainly age is a factor in it all. We're all more fragile the older we get, but it's not the only factor, I suspect. So I'd say with the Mitch thing, the next call is his to tell us, what we should know, if there's anything we know. And
one quick follow, just to bring it home, because I mean, ultimately, probably what do we do about it? Well, I mean, it's up to the voters, right? I mean, they could always vote for somebody different. But I mean, let's bring it home. In North Dakota, we have a ballot measure being circulated that would put an age limit on Congress if it passes. Now, I think that this is unconstitutional. I suspect the people circulating it are hoping the Supreme Court would make it constitutional if it got challenged. That issue aside, I'm not necessarily against this. How do you feel about that ballot measure? As somebody who it could maybe one day, I know you're not that old, but somebody it could apply to one day.
First of all, I'm not likely to be somebody that stays in the Senate until I'm 80. As you know, I feel so strongly, and I've said this multiple times, and I continue to say it. The richness of our system is that we have these cycles where we all come up for re-election, and we choose whether to run or not, and then the voters choose whether we serve longer or not. It's just kind of awesome, and it's exceptional. That said, I don't know why we would voluntarily in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a law that's constitutional, change the Constitution, term limits. I don't know why we would limit our options as the freest people in the world. To me, it's completely counter to the American experiment and exceptionalism. The voters are more than capable of determining whether one person's age is a problem or not, or whether they just want to have a personal blanket cap on age. That they can certainly do that, but I just don't see why we'd make that decision for everybody and change laws to do it. So I get that people get excited and do some things impulsively. This one just never has made sense to me.
Yeah, and Senator Cramer, I think about Quentin Burdick and Strom Thurmond. I mean, these ideas of having aging senators is not a new concept at all.
Or even on the court. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's a recent example.
Right.
William Rehnquist died in office.
And I think we're actually in a better position to deal with it now because there's so much more transparency through the internet and other things to see how Dianne Feinstein is performing or other things like that. But going back to Mitch McConnell really quick, do you feel like as a voting member of the caucus and somebody who's in, a position to influence others, that you're getting all the information you need to make the determination on Senator McConnell's health? And is there a scenario where you guys don't feel like you're getting enough where there is a push to remove Senator McConnell? Or is it really all in his is the ball all in his court? Well,
it's in his court for now, Chad. So to your point, my point is that it's now up to him to tell us what he's willing to tell us. And then it's up to us, to your point, to determine whether he's telling us enough and whether we can be assured by he and his doctors and Dr. Moynihan, all of that. As you know, Dr. Moynihan, who's the, he's the physician for the Congress, and he has a staff of, other professionals and whatnot. And he consults with your personal doctors if it's an individual. And he has given him the all clear to continue his work. Is that adequate? It may be, or there are other factors that might go into it, like, how do you plan to lead into the next year? How do you plan to deal with with a potential government shutdown? And are you up to that? There'll be a lot of questions. Is there a time when it's appropriate for the caucus to make a decision? Sure, Mitch, just like we all serve at the behest of our voters, the same is true of our leader, although we do have the authority within our own rules where 5 members can call a caucus meeting. And that caucus meeting and the agenda can be, set by the members, and we can call for an election if we need to. I don't think it'll come to that. I'd be very surprised, frankly, if it came to that. I wouldn't be shocked if somebody tried to do it, although I don't think anybody that wants to replace Mitch McConnell would lead such an effort. So, because I have a lot of faith in Mitch and in his own judgment, and he and Elaine working together. I know them both obviously very well, and then he's just got to reassure us, and then we'll see if it's satisfactory or not to me and to my colleagues.
I want to talk about the presidential race for a minute. I know you're an enthusiastic Doug Burgum supporter, as am I. I'm convinced I'd put him in the White House and get to work, Doug. But it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't.
Nor should it. But do you feel like it's a time, because we had the national debate. He I think he did okay, but he didn't. We're a couple weeks removed now, a few weeks removed now. He's gone down in the real clear polling average from 0.6 to 0.4. I don't see a lot of movement in the states. Speaking, obviously, he's the hometown guy and you know him personally and you support him for president, but there's also a larger question here about putting the best candidate forward for Republicans for 2024. Is there a point at which it's time for Doug to get out?
Well, Doug maybe, and several others, because consolidating everybody that's not Donald Trump, is the only, in my view, the only possible way to prevent Donald Trump from being the nominee. And I'm not saying I don't want him to be the nominee. I want Doug Burgum to be the nominee. So that position is really clear. What happens after that, we'll see. But I do think, Rob, in this scenario, consolidating the other group is going to become important. With regard to Doug's standing, one of the things that let's face it, Doug had a very unfortunate accident the night before the debate, and that probably had some impact. Good for him for even getting there and standing at that podium and sounding like Doug Burgum. that said, clearly sharp elbows and aggressive. I mean, even my friend, the former Vice President Mike Pence, who is one of the most gentle people I know, he looked like a tiger and showed some fight. And I think with 8 people on the stage, that's kind of what it comes down to: who has the sharpest elbows, who can scream the loudest and get the attention. And that's certainly not one of Doug's characteristics. So obviously it's up to him. I'm with him until he makes that decision himself. I will say this: I talked to President Trump a couple of weeks ago before the debate. In fact, he told me on that Friday, because I asked him, I said, are you going to debate? He said, no, but don't tell anybody because I haven't announced it yet. And I said, I'd been shocked if you would have, honestly. And he just had glowing things to say about Governor Burgum. He just said he's such a good guy. He said, I think you're supporting him makes all the sense in the world. He said, I would encourage you to keep supporting him. He's a really good guy. He's always been, good to me. And I certainly can see him having a future, in national politics. So, I mean, it was really quite sweet, to be honest with you.
So speaking of the former president, obviously he's in some legal issues that, have to work their way through the process of the courts. Mm-hmm. But at what point, you as somebody who obviously wants a Republican to get elected in 2024, mm-hmm. and the former president's numbers keep going up. I mean, after the debate, after the indictments or whatever, as somebody who doesn't want a Republican to get elected in 2024, I kind of like seeing that. But from your perspective, when does I don't see the voters deciding that Donald Trump should not be the Republican nominee. I mean, are you concerned about the timeline here and how this all works out? And when would you say that Donald Trump should consider, what would have to happen for you to think that Donald Trump should drop out of this race? And I know you can't foretell the future. I understand that.
But as you know, Chad, I'm pretty open. So here we go. With regard to Donald Trump, one of the things I said to him on our phone call, which was really pretty fun, because I said, Mr. President, you've said a lot of funny, profound things, and oftentimes they're the same thing. But when you said I'm only one indictment away from victory, and this was when I talked to him was right after the 4th indictment, the Georgia indictment. And I said that was both profound and perhaps the funniest thing you've ever said. And the reality is, I think it may very well come true. Right. I think that's exactly what's happening to him with the base and with the party. But part of why that's resonating with so many people, including me, by the way, isn't even so much because they love seeing a guy get indicted. It's because they see a Department of Justice and a president going after a political opponent, only to find out that for 5 years they've been covering for the guy that's in the White House. And that is what's going to cloud, and what is clouding the whole issue of Donald Trump's legal challenges, is that this 2-tiered system of justice is so bad that people are actually putting themselves in Donald Trump's place and saying this can happen to anybody.
But Senator, let's talk about this 2-tiered justice system. I believe we have a 2-tiered justice system. I don't think it's Donald Trump getting treated differently. I think if you're rich and influential, there's one system. Tell me if January 6th happened during the DAPL protest and President Archambault told a bunch of Native Americans to run down the state capitol, that somehow he would be treated differently than Donald Trump. I mean, this suggestion that there's 2 different systems of justice and Donald Trump is the guy who's getting wronged in this system is ludicrous from my perspective.
Yeah, well, there's 2 problems with your perspective. One is Donald Trump is rich and influential, and he's the victim of this. And on the other problem is, I quite honestly think, and I love Dave Archambault, just so you know, he is a friend, and he's one of my favorite leaders, even in areas where we don't agree. There's a lot we do, and I support him. And I think in many respects, Dave was, became a victim of his times when he lost his reelection. Anyway, all that said, that's another political story for another day. But I actually think in many respects, the encampment that became the headquarters for the Dakota Access Pipeline protests were protected. They were protected. And I think in many cases unjustly. Who else would have been able to camp out on Army Corps of Engineers land free with a permit, no less? It's certainly not.
But Senator, if they would have ran over the Capitol, like what happened on January 6th, it would have been a different situation than what's happening with President Trump right now.
Well, I think that's not a great comparison because I mean, a lot of the people who participated in the January, like the actual protesters, have been convicted. I mean, they have been convicted. They have been put through it. We're talking about Donald Trump specifically, who, whatever his role was in instigating it, I suspect we'd have a wide range of opinions on that. Here, I feel like he was very central to it, but I don't want to relitigate that question. He wasn't there. He didn't breach the Capitol, so that becomes problematic. I guess what worries me is that I worry that we get so worried about, we talk about Donald Trump, so we say, well, what about Hunter Biden? And I mean, I think we forget that it's possible to say, boy, it sure seems like Hunter Biden wasn't exposed to the entire spectrum of justice that he should have been, and that doesn't excuse anything Donald Trump did. Like, I don't understand how anything Hunter Biden did excuses what Joe Biden did. And by the way, it's not just the Department of Justice. It's also a district attorney in New York and a district attorney in the state of Georgia.
And the two flimsiest cases of all are in Georgia and New York by state, political climbing Democrats.
I don't agree with that.
The reality is that he is being treated differently. And he is rich and influential. To my point, I don't know how you say that he's going to be treated better. He certainly isn't being treated better.
How do you treat? I mean, when you're a former president getting indicted, who else is ever going to be treated that way? I mean, it's also. I mean, I think that's the other thing we're kind of missing. This isn't some guy who robbed Kmart, allegedly. This is a former president of the United States who allegedly tried to undermine a national election. He's going to be treated differently. Nobody else has ever been in this situation before. Isn't that true?
Sure, it is. Sure, it's true. But and let me throw something else into this, Rob, though, that I think further complicates the Department of Justice's defense of their actions. And that is the fact that there's nothing new that they didn't know 2 years ago that they could have done the same thing in. So in other words, every charge, every indictment just happens to be right on top of or right behind another Hunter Biden revelation, which, by the way, isn't just a Hunter Biden revelation. I mean, now they are finding emails with a pseudonym that the vice president used to discuss the very things he said he didn't know anything about. This is about Joe Biden. This is about a very corrupt, very wealthy public servant named Joe Biden. And this was not just ignored. This was protected. This information was protected by the FBI, but for 5-member majority for Republicans in the House of Representatives.
But I don't understand how. I mean, we're going to talk about Joe Biden using a nom de plume on email to potentially hide. I mean, that sounds terrible. I'm all for going after that. But we also have Donald Trump alleged to have, apparently had people erase security camera footage when he was allegedly trying to hide classified documents. How is that any different? Why shouldn't the president, if he did that, why shouldn't he be prosecuted for it?
Well, once again, because the very people prosecuting him are his political adversaries who protected the person that's in the White House now from perhaps allegedly taking a $5 million bribe from a foreign adversary. Now, nothing that Donald Trump's even being accused of comes anywhere near colluding with governments of China and Russia and Burisma and all these things only for your own personal wealth and using Air Force Two and your office in the White House and your office as Vice President of the United States. Listen, Joe Biden he's kind of a dingbat. I don't know. I've been around him. He's kind of a clown, and I don't think he takes a lot of things very seriously, quite honestly. And so in some respects, he's probably a little bit like Donald Trump. My only point is, okay, Donald Trump may have done all these things. They're alleging that he's done all of these things. I think they're piling on an awful lot of things that that aren't relevant, quite honestly. These are all grand juries, so far. And again, you used the point, well, Rob, allegedly, he's not been convicted of anything. And it's just conveniently at a time when he's leading in the polls and when all this other stuff is coming out about the vice president of the United States. And weirdly, he's leading now in national polls. And I'm not saying among Republicans, he's now leading in 2 national polls this week, one by a Democratic pollster in the popular vote, which only means a landslide electoral victory if that stands. And we're a long ways from election day, so it may or it may not.
So I just want to say I'm all for the special prosecutor looking into Hunter Biden and wherever the investigation goes. I think that's a good thing. I think that we should, no matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, we should look into these things from a pretty fair point of view. I think we're sort of losing that. I think we're sort of losing the, if it's the politicization of Department of Justice, we should do something about that, because that's our court system and our police and investigators, they should be above politics, and we need them, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, to be that way. Yeah, I'm shifting a little bit back to politics. Senator Cramer, one of the things that is really impressive, I give you a lot of credit for what happened at the last GOP convention and standing up for John Hoeven and making sure that he was able to sort of take on the challenge from Rick Becker.
Sure.
You seem to do a really good job of being able to be in both camps. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like you're straddling the line, but to have respect in both the more Bastiat caucus and more the traditional Republicans. How do you go about sort of like making sure you maintain trust in both of those camps within the Republican Party?
Well, that's Chad. Thank you for the question and the observation. And it's really not a strategy so much as just part of it is this. I'm sitting here talking to you two guys, and I like doing this. I think it's I feel an obligation to do this, along with the radio things I do, along with walking through the hallways in the Capitol, making sure that everybody from NBC, New York Times, to all the way to KFGO radio have my cell number so they can contact me. I think part of gaining trust is that you communicate a lot with people, that you have relationships with people, that you don't run from the fire. I think some of it's that, Chad. But I also say, I was party chairman when our state's politics looked very, very different.
Right.
I was party chairman when I appointed co-chairs of the platform committee, or what I guess was called resolutions committee, one pro-life, one pro-choice. And because I wanted to add to our party, not subtract from our party. And I see the same thing sort of happen, not sort of, the same thing happened with more the libertarian strain of our party, where party leaders were suddenly feeling very comfortable. And so they could sort of set the Ron Paul people aside, turn off the microphones at the convention to make sure none of their people get to go to the national convention. And that's why I didn't seek the party nomination that year, because I saw that trend happening and it bothered me. Because as Rob has pointed out many times over the years, politics you're successful in politics when you add, not when you subtract or divide. So I've always had this open relationship with everybody. I'd say another thing, Chad, and this is, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, Rob, but, being on the ballot this go around, everybody's looking at my last voting record in the last Congress. In the last Congress, I had 92% with Heritage, 88% with, the Gold Pack, 82% with one of the other conservative groups, received all these awards for my conservative voting record. And I was the one Republican that earned the Bipartisan Policy Center's Legislative Action Award for my bipartisan work. I think what's being lost in politics today is the art of how to spend and collect capital. And this is something that used to be common in politics. But we've gotten to a point today where everybody wants either a progressive king or a right-wing king or a Republican king or a Democratic king. They don't really want 535 members of Congress because everybody sort of believes they can have everything. And I think just speaking to that on a regular basis like I do has helped me. I'm blessed to represent 780,000 people, most of whom I probably have met. That's just the blessing of being from North Dakota. With regard to John Hoeven, what's kind of funny is his voting record's almost identical to mine. Almost identical. The difference being that I talk to people. I've helped a lot of the same people that supported Rick Becker. I've helped them build their district parties. I've helped elect their legislators. I send a lot of money from my leadership PAC to their campaigns because we need them all in the tent.
To that end, we've seen some of those folks. I wrote a story about it in the last week. I saw that. Some federal political action committees, and for the life of me. And they're not, at this point, they're not exactly open with me about their plans. Maybe they're not open with anybody. I don't know. I'm the big loudmouth. It's probably the wrong person to tell. But I don't know why they would be starting these things if they weren't going to get involved in federal elections. And when I wrote about it, I had a couple of them on Facebook sure make it sound like their intent was to go after our congressional incumbents, which would be you. So have you thought about that? Have you looked at that at all, where they may, I must be trying to raise some money to run a primary against you?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I mean, it is the trend in the country. And oftentimes there are national groups that make a lot of money setting up local entities to go after, rhinos and Republican incumbents because 92% isn't a good enough conservative rating, and we should show these people and they don't love Donald Trump enough for whatever reason. Same is true on the left. It happens on the left as well, where the biggest challenges incumbents have anymore is from within their own party. So that's a trend that we all have to look out for, and I do. But this is also, Rob, why all those years ago in 2012, when I made the decision to become the first Republican in history to run against the endorsed candidate, I chose to try the party open, as opposed to let a small group of activists on a particular weekend in March or April make a really big decision. So do I think about it? Sure. Do I worry about it? Not a ton. But at the same time, do I have a strategy for it? I do. I'm preparing for that possibility. But I'd also say, looking at the PACs that you wrote about, if they're just a political action committee, a federal political action committee that can raise money at a certain limit and then give it away at a certain limit, each of them can only give $5,000 to an opponent's race, unless they are a super PAC, in which case they can do all kinds of things.
One of them actually, after I wrote it, I think actually later that afternoon, they changed their designation to an independent spending group. So I think one of them at least is a super PAC. I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly going to be following that, and that's an interesting.
Can I ask one follow-up question, Senator? It seems to me that you just indicated you're running for re-election in 2024.
See, this is a smart interview, Rob. You have to admit, this is getting to be really smart.
Yeah, very smart. Now, I was able to connect those dots. Would you ever consider, if the governor's office would come open in 2024, looking at a governor's race?
I just want to point out, I've already asked this question on a previous interview, but go ahead. Good going, Chad.
Hold on. I should start listening. I only listen when I'm on. That's the problem.
See, that makes two of us, Chad. No, that's not true. So here, that's a great question. Here's the answer I think I've always given. I hope I gave this with you, Rob. I always look at myself, remembering I tried not to run for this job several times. I told everybody from Mitch McConnell to the president to Kelly Armstrong, who was the party chairman, no many times. And when I finally did it, because I thought it was the best way I could serve the people of North Dakota and the country. And the Senate is a place that honors old age, as we've started this conversation talking about. And, seniority matters. And I don't see why I would want to give up North Dakota's seniority, or at least an attempt to hang on to North Dakota's seniority while running for another office, which, by the way, I would enjoy very much. I used to want to be governor. I thought it would be great to be governor. I had things I'd love to do as governor. But that's highly unlikely in this cycle. Just again, back to your point, I'm more likely to run for re-election to the Senate, as I said, because the Senate actually respects and honors old age and actually rewards it.
Not quite the answer. I think the answer you gave before was never say never. Which is a little more provocative. So you were a little more circumspect this time around.
Read between the lines. He said, "Never say never."
Yeah. All right, that's true. We'll get into parsing the political speech in the next segment. Senator, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it,
Senator.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks both of you, and it was a very smart interview.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
Okay, just finished up our second interview. We're going to, I guess, talk about everything we heard and maybe some other things here a little bit. I will tell you, Kevin Cramer is somebody I genuinely like, always have. I think he pushes the button in the Senate the way I want him to most of the time. Obviously, Chad, you're going to feel differently. Maybe I don't,
Right.
And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who I would never vote for, who I also genuinely like as people. I will tell you that when I talk about Donald Trump with Kevin Cramer, it makes me want to throw a television out the window.
Yeah.
Because I don't, somehow we always end up talking about Joe Biden. And it's like, whatever Joe Biden has done, and believe me, I am on board for investigations. I am on board for the idea that he's done all sorts of unseemly things. But when I hear you talking about Donald Trump, I want to say, okay, now do Trump. Now hold Trump to that same standard that you're holding Joe Biden.
I just can't stand. Well, and first of all, what I will say first about Kevin Cramer is the nice thing about Kevin Cramer is he doesn't really have to think about what he said in the past because he's always so honest. I mean, he's honest during interviews. I mean,
recklessly so. I remember when he was going to run in 2012 when he was first running for Congress. There was a longtime Capitol reporter who described Kevin to me as being recklessly honest, and I thought that was accurate.
I mean, I've heard people talking about, the governor at the debate, or maybe it's a Chuck Todd interview, said, "I'm not running for pundit in chief." I mean, Kevin Cramer is a U.S. senator who also has some pundit in him as well.
He doesn't mind weighing in on stuff. He'll talk about whatever.
Yeah. No, and I hate in the sort of two systems of justice and Trump is the one who's getting treated poorly by the judicious.
I'm open to the idea that Biden's getting a pass on some stuff. I'm open to the idea, and shame on the Department of Justice if that's what's going on.
That's true. Yes,
I would even say some of the things that have been exposed, Hunter Biden absolutely got a pass, and it's such a complicated issue because I agree with you. We spend a lot of time talking about how there's two criminal justice systems based on race. Frankly, I think it has a lot more to do with class. Because I think even if you're black, if you have a lot of money and can afford the lawyers, O.J. Simpson, you can get away with murder. So, right. I mean, that's kind of the situation that we're in where, I think there is a lot of things to say about a multi-tier justice system that we could have serious conversations about and identify real problems. But all of the things that have been revealed about Donald Trump and everything that has gone on, I just don't see that he's the that he's the problem. I mean, I don't understand how you can look at, the fact that, Rudy Giuliani has admitted, like, he's got a default judgment now. And also previously his lawyer stipulated to the fact that he libeled a couple of election workers in Georgia. You have, the fact that Trump workers allegedly shutting off cameras or deleting security camera footage in order to, try to hide evidence.
Yeah, I think that, a frustration I had also during that sort of conversation about Trump is sort of the idea that these are flimsy cases or like there's no there. And, let's go through the process. But the idea of already suggesting that, speaking of playing the victim, Donald Trump is great at playing the victim in all these cases. Sometimes you make choices. And Trump made some choices, and he hasn't been held to account for decades and decades and decades. And here we are. But it's very interesting how Trump is such a huge figure in our politics that we're having this nice interview. And the second that I brought up Trump, it felt like it just sort of went off the rails for a little bit, talking about anytime Trump is, because it feels like having thoughtful interviews based on facts can quickly go to some different place when we start talking about Trump.
Because I think a lot there's nothing. It's irrational. I think continuing to support Trump at this point, looking at what he's done to our country, looking at his electability, and I don't know. Maybe he can beat Biden again, which by the way is an indictment of Democrats. Can you pick somebody better for the country than Joe Biden again? If Joe Biden is this susceptible to being beaten by Donald Trump, that terrifies me.
Well, listen, there's one person who's beaten Donald Trump in the past, and it was Joe Biden. So I'm not really too quick to give up on him. Hillary was supposed to be this political juggernaut, and she got her tail kicked by Donald Trump for a variety of different reasons. But yeah, and I wish we would somehow get to a place where we're not talking about the former president being indicted, this president's son being investigated, Again, I will go back to Barack Obama's years. This kind of stuff wasn't happening.
But I don't think you could separate Trump either from the movement, because you look at kind of the luminaries of what purports to be conservatism these days. You have Tucker Carlson, who's over in Eastern Europe, being a shill for Viktor Orban, who's a dictator. I don't understand why. Or we're talking about how Russia is being persecuted by the United States because it's a Christian country. No, it's not. Vladimir Putin has oppressed religious people in Russia, particularly churches that might be critical of the Putin regime. So, but the thing is Tucker Carlson is seen, he's very much an ally of Donald Trump. He's seen as kind of a standard bearer for this new strain of populist, nationalist conservatism. How do you separate Trump from that? How do you say continuing to support Donald Trump and considering to accept him as the leader of the Republican Party also brings in all of these awful things like a Tucker Carlson?
But you brought up Russia. I simply cannot wrap my head around some conservative position on Russia. There is a time where obviously everybody would be against the Russian dictator who's killing people, anti-religious, all those different things. And for some reason, there's people on the conservative side of things, the Trump side of things, who think this guy's okay. This is somebody who we should universally not like.
I remember when conservatives would criticize Democrats for being too in awe of Barack Obama. And some of that criticism, I think, was apt. When Barack Obama wins a Nobel Peace Prize for winning an election, I think even Obama would admit that was too much.
But Rob, when's the last time you saw an Obama flag driving around town? We never saw a lot of them in North Dakota, but and you're right. I'm not saying that these things are equal. I am saying that some people on the left got carried away with the Obama stuff, the Obama idolatry, I guess you want to call it. But I don't see how you turn around then and then just worship Trump like this, to the point where he makes absolutely ludicrous, juvenile statements on social media about like his athletic prowess. He's out golfing and stuff, and it's so stupid because it doesn't matter, and I don't really care about his golf game or anything like that, and if he wants to claim these things. But also it makes me think of Vladimir Putin claiming that he beat a bunch of retired professional hockey players at 69 years old, playing with his puppet dictator from Belarus. Or Kim Jong-il claiming that the first time he played golf, he hit like 5 holes in one round. This is ridiculous, but yet we're expected to believe it. Have you read the Chris Cillizza book on presidents and their sports?
No.
Because he talks a lot about like you did your column about Trump being the club champion before the club even opened, so he could have a trophy and tell everybody he was the champion. And it's a really interesting thing. Yeah. That's where I also heard more about the Axelrod elbowing Obama in the face the night before the debate, which reminded me of the Burgum story.
But it's stuff like that where I want to shout at conservatives like, this bothered you, and not entirely unjustly when it was a Democrat, but for some reason when it's Trump, it's like, oh, ha, ha, look at how upset the liberals are about this. Ha, ha, ha. I don't understand how you're not looking. Like, if it's bad when Obama does it, it's bad when Trump does it. Right. That to me, that's a basic thing.
I talked to a frustrated conservative a few weeks ago in North Dakota who was talking about his frustration that in order, like with the Republican Party, the only thing is to be mean to Democrats. That's often sort of what Republicans stand for these days, or mean to people who disagree with you.
I've written about that before, because that's actually something in my career very early on. That I decided that as somebody who was going to have a public voice and what is now probably one of the largest, if not the largest, political audience in North Dakota, I need to be very careful about what's influencing me and how I'm arriving at my decisions, which is why I don't watch cable news. I don't listen to local talk radio. I try to work with primary sources and arrive at things that are genuine expressions of how I feel based on, my convictions and everything else. Because I think if you allow yourself to be defined by the people you don't like, so, Joe Heitkamp's for something, therefore I have to be against it. Well, if I do that, then Joe Heitkamp's in charge of who I am. And then I end up becoming the thing that Joe Heitkamp accuses me of being. And I look at the conservative movement right now, and I think of all the liberals who spent years tearing down who I think were honorable people like Mitt Romney, George W. Both the Bush presidents, tearing them down, and they were terrible and war criminals and just terrible, terrible people. And I'm not saying that those guys are above criticism, but it got so over the top. And I think part of it is Republicans just reached a point where they just decided, well, they're going to say we're that anyway, so we're just going to be it. Or we allow like modern conservatives allow sort of liberals to dictate what conservatives are going to care about because we're just against whatever they're for. So if they start talking about trans people, then suddenly we have to be against trans people, and we're not thinking about it. We're not trying to be nuanced about it. It's just a knee-jerk reactionary thing, and it's gross to me. But I mean, to me, that your point that really resonated with me, and that's something even well before the Trump era I was thinking about for myself. I don't want to be just the opposite of whatever the people I don't like are for.
And it's interesting you brought up, the Bushes and the Romneys, and I think about doing some self-reflection about how I felt about particularly the second Bush and then also Mitt Romney. And, those are two guys who I had disdain for back there. And it probably was more from a really uber partisan lens, not from a lens of, maturity and growing up a little bit. But the one thing about Bush and Romney, they have not become those conservatives who are just reactionary, right? There's still even though they may have had to deal with progressives being a little bit, sort of saying there's something that they're not. I mean, both of them, to their credit, are very much the same people they were when they ran. And they've both called out Trump and called out the ills of the conservative movement right now.
Yeah. And Dick Cheney, too, by the way. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who is even more of a target on the right. And again, I mean, there's plenty of criticisms to be made of those people. But, I was talking to somebody just last night at my son's soccer game who was telling me, Rob, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when you were the young radical, right? Like you were the one. And I mean, there's always that thing, like I get accused of having changed all the time. And I don't really think that I have any more than I think anybody changes over a career that spans from my early 20s to my early 40s. Yeah, I've changed somewhat. I've had children. I've lived life. I have more wealth now. I have property. I mean, I've changed as a person. Of course that's going to change me. But I don't like a lot of my politics. I don't think have changed that much. I think our differences seem smaller now because we're back to fighting some very fundamental things about like book bans and the First Amendment and free and open elections that I never thought we would have to debate in the United States. Like I felt like we had reached a consensus. We kind of put a pin on it. People can read what they want to read. People can live their lives the way they want to live them. I feel like we've taken such a step backwards. A lot of, the small disagreements we had over healthcare and taxes and everything back in the 2000s, the early 2000s, seem so much smaller now compared to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, the death panels of the Obamacare conversations do seem smaller than the things we're dealing. I mean, in all seriousness, right? I mean, we were taking a provision of a law and making it into this huge thing, and
I never liked the death panels term, but that was a legitimate debate over who gets to decide your health care. If the government's paying for it, where does their ability to make health care decisions for you end?
And the options are on public option or no public option. That's a part of Obamacare, like really legitimate conversations about policy. And I don't think we have those anymore. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, geez, we're mentioning healthcare. Is there anything that's more personal, anything that's more important to individual people? And instead we're talking about book bans. But you brought up like issues around LGBTQ. I mean, I think about how much we've stepped backwards. I thought after the marriage equality, was affirmed, that we're done with this now. We're done talking about this. And it feels like it's even more and more of an issue now than it was.
And this is always a hard argument to make. I think one of the problems with the way it came to be is that it was a Supreme Court ruling. It wasn't a democratic process. There wasn't buy-in from the voters. The court just issued an edict. This is how it's going to be. And that never makes people happy.
But don't you think even before the Supreme Court, it was the society had changed I felt like society had changed their views and evolved on this so much that it was getting to the point where, okay, this is just going to continue to be.
I felt like we were. I mean, that's why I argue. And again, I understand that it's hard for people who are being treated ill by the law. It's hard for them to hear this, and I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to it. I'm making a process argument about something that is central to how they live their lives. So I don't want people to think that I'm being insensitive here, but I really think because I agree with you, that I feel like we were on a trajectory to being more accepting for that. That's why I didn't want the Supreme Court to rule on it. I wanted states like North Dakota to slowly get rid of the laws on the books and to be inclusive. And I still feel if we'd gone that route, maybe we don't see the backlash we're seeing now. And some of the backlash is against, we talk about January 6th and what an ugly situation, and then you brought up DAPL. You don't think that there are people who watched what happened at the Dakota Access Pipeline, watched the protesters get completely out of hand, who didn't think, okay, well, if the left's going to do it, we'll do it too. Or watch the Black Lives Matter protesters burning down police precincts.
But I think I brought up DAPL and I think the police precincts. Nobody who's defending Donald Trump right now would say that these guys should not have gotten in trouble for the things that they did illegal. And none of those protests, and maybe the burning down police precincts is on level, but to go to the institution and break in and break things and all those different things, DAPL never did. I mean, there's some issues with personal property, right? I mean, there's no doubt, but they weren't breaking into an institution and doing all those different things. So I don't know. And probably DAPL's the wrong example, because what was more immediate to it was probably the BLM the George Floyd protests and that. Right.
And I think it's hard where we're watching. I remember Lloyd Omdahl had a headline where sometimes things have to burn. I'm forgetting the exact word. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was defending it. He was justifying it. And I think there was a lot, and I was among them. I was very frustrated with people on the left who weren't more willing to say, I want racial justice. I think what's motivating these protests is correct. I think what the protesters are doing in a lot of instances is absolutely wrong and indefensible. I didn't hear a lot of that coming from the left, and I think that made an impact. I think there is a tit for tat thing, right and left, where if the left does something, the right does something, and if the right does something, the left does something, and it gets worse.
And I think there's a bit of a ends justify the means sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, like when I think about the George Floyd stuff, I mean, if you're an African American and you're seeing your kids get killed by cops or other things like that, I mean, it's hard for me to say don't do that. Now, on the flip side, if you truly believe that the government is being stolen from you through an election and you're sort of Donald Trump, up on a pedestal is telling you the election's been stolen,
and you're the vanguard,
and you think the only way to stop this is by doing what they did. I mean, there is some similarities there. I just think one's based in reality and one's not.
Well, we
shouldn't burn things, though.
But I mean, I think that's the argument, though, is that the ends don't justify the means. That's that's why we say that the ends don't justify the means. So it doesn't matter. We could sit and have a debate about and by the way, I'm 100% behind what motivated the George Floyd protests. Police brutality is terrible. I've written extensively about it. Heck, I'm taking it on the chin right now. I don't even like school resource officers in schools. I think we're using them the wrong way, which is probably another thing we could have a great debate about. But
we could have a great discussion. I actually was just on a conference call this morning regarding SROs in North Dakota schools and some of the things that, what is the role of an SRO in a school? I mean,
that's a good debate to have. I don't know. It's not all bad. I mean, I think there's good aspects of it, but do those good things outweigh the bad? I don't know. because I really worry about criminalizing misbehavior. I think of the way I behaved as a 13-year-old sometimes, and I worry what would have happened if I'd done it in front of instead of a principal, figuratively taking me by the ear and calling my parents and rightfully getting me some detention. I worry if I'd been a cop, now I got a police record. Granted, as a minor, but still,
And I think that there is some around the juvenile justice changes, some pieces that are trying to look at that. But an SRO is in a school and they're not a police officer in the school until they are a police officer in the school. And I think it's just it can be very, very confusing in terms of, anyway, that's a whole nother subject that we could probably talk about for hours and hours and hours. So I'm not going to go into it.
I don't know. I at this point now, I don't even remember how we got there, but I'm talking about law enforcement and the role of law enforcement in our society. I don't want to live in a police state. But I just, the way we talk about things and right and left, I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around. And in this moment, Trumpism is kind of the worst manifestation of what we're talking about. But there's a long history going back and forth of both sides saying the ends justify the means. I could say these terrible things about George W. Bush because I'm really, really against the war in Iraq. But there was a consequence for that. Right. And we're paying it now. So anyway, maybe that's a good place to wrap this up. It's kind of a longer episode. But hey, we're heading into a holiday weekend. People got more time to listen when they're on the holiday weekend. Don't spend time with your friends and family. Hole up in a room and listen to this podcast.
And think about what organized labor has done to provide you with 40-hour work weeks, safe work environments, and all the different things that we should appreciate organized labor for. Yeah.
And by the way, I have no problems with organized labor. My father and mother were both government workers who were in. My wife is a member of North Dakota United. So
that's the best union I can think of.
Yeah. Well, by the way, Chad works, for people who don't know, Chad works for North Dakota United. Full disclosure there, because we're not trying to hide anything on this podcast. But my only problem with organized labor is it should be a choice for everybody.
Well, luckily where you live, it is a choice.
Yes.
So you can love labor.
I can. All right. We're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with more stuff to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about the SROs thing. I think that is really an interesting conversation. All right. I'm really going to end the show now. I'm going to stop filibustering. I'm like a politician answering a question.
This is the most North Dakota end of a podcast ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, goodbye. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.